World War I was not only a war of trenches or artillery, the war was not carried out solely with bayonets, cannons, and rifles. In World War I, in addition to all the battlefronts, there was one more front. This was the financial front, where the powerful took the lead at the table. A war fought in their secret offices, even though they had never set foot on the battlefield. A war waged through gold reserves, bond markets, and central banks. While soldiers paid with their lives, bankers and governments were calculating balance sheets. And the financial front opened in those years not only determined the winner of the war, but also shaped the global financial system that still affects you today. Do you think war is only about policies, weapons, and armies? If your answer is yes, you should think again. World War I proved something very clearly, that money is one of the deadliest weapons ever created. In 1914, Europe was in turmoil. Colonial ambitions, national rivalries, and military alliances had completely taken over the continent. Beneath all the speeches about empire and honor lay one truth, and that truth was money. As the footsteps of war grew louder, acting according to the power of money became a necessity because a war of this scale revealed the need for unimaginable amounts of money. And unfortunately, when leaders chose to go to war, they were in a way choosing debt as well. Every empire that opted for war found itself trapped under a burden of debt and dragged its people into an economic burden alongside it. They believed the war would end very quickly, maybe by Christmas. They thought they could bear the burden with traditional methods, with patriotic donations and limited borrowing, just like in the past. But within weeks, this illusion vanished, and the war began burning through money at a scale and speed no one could have imagined. Even in the summer of 1914, Europe's financial system relied on the gold standard. Governments guaranteed that their paper money could be exchanged for gold. Although this system provided trust in money, it restricted governments' gold reserves were limited, and they had no chance of constantly printing money. Britain, France, and Germany's gold reserves existed, but as millions of soldiers were turned into an industrial war machine, costs skyrocketed. By the end of 1914, Germany was spending about 10 million marks a day. Britain's daily war cost reached 2.5 million pounds in a very short time. The math was simple. Gold would not be enough. Governments began suspending many rules, and after a while, major powers began abandoning the gold standard. They quietly made their citizens accept that money was now based solely on the promise of the state. This was one of the most important turning points in modern financial history. A new era began in which money and power separated from gold and became tied to printing, credit, and perception management. Once governments tasted this freedom, they never returned to the old system. And that moment was precisely when the financial war truly began. Because Germany, isolated from global capital and trapped under the blockade of the British Navy, had only one option left: domestic borrowing. The state launched propaganda. The public was called to donate all their savings for the homeland. Massive bond campaigns were started, and this propaganda seemed to work. More than 100 billion marks flowed into the state treasury. Although this hope-based propaganda seemed effective, once defeat came, the bonds became worthless, Germans lost their savings, and these losses later turned into rage, opening the door for extremism in the years to follow. The fact that London was the world's financial center worked to Britain's great advantage. Sterling became a safe haven. At first, like Germany, they relied on patriotic appeals, but soon they needed America's credit. Although the United States was officially neutral in World War I, its bankers saw an opportunity. Firms like J.P. Morgan became crucial for Britain and France. Massive loans were provided, and the purchase of weapons and materials was managed. Wall Street began financing the Allies, and when the U.S. joined the war in 1917, it used this power. At the end of the war, the U.S. transformed from debtor to creditor, from financial follower to global leader, and thus the American century of the 20th century began. France was no different. It borrowed both internally and externally. Its most important source was America. This indebtedness became very influential in post-war politics. When repayments became a problem, politics turned toxic. Russia's financial war was quite poor. Being a massive empire did not mean its financial front was strong. Russia's banking system was weak, and although its gold reserves looked strong on paper, they were insufficient in practice. It borrowed from France. As defeats increased and inflation rose, trust in the ruble collapsed. With the losses on the financial front during the war, economic collapse followed, and then political collapse. The 1917 revolution may appear driven solely by ideology, but financial collapse played a decisive role in the process. By the end of the war, the Allies had spent $140 billion and the Central Powers $60 billion. The gold standard completely collapsed, and inflation spread across the economies of all the countries that took part in the war. A short time later, the hyperinflation that would be seen in Germany would go down in history as one of the most extreme examples. The cost of this was paid by workers, savers, and small investors. Elites protected themselves by moving their wealth abroad thanks to their information advantage. World War I taught governments one more thing: managing money in a way detached from reality. They saw that they could suspend gold, print money without limit, sell bonds to their citizens, and later cover up the ruins with propaganda and perception games. And this play is still being staged today. When the war ended in 1918, not only the battlefronts but also the balance sheets were battlegrounds. A transformation had taken place in the world. Europe was drowning in debt. London's financial supremacy had ended. The U.S. held the world's largest gold reserves and creditor position, and Wall Street had risen. Because the war was financed with debt, it opened the door to new wars in the peace period. This new war was called the War of Money. Britain and France, in order to keep the promises they made to their citizens, demanded massive reparations from Germany. The Treaty of Versailles' 132 billion gold marks was a fantasy. When Germany could not escape the debt trap, its economy collapsed, and hyperinflation broke out in 1923. In an effort to regain its former power, Britain decided in 1925 to return to the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate. But this decision was a major mistake. The result was deflation, unemployment, and unrest. The U.S., unsure of how to use its newfound financial victory, saw its banks flood Europe with credit. A cycle was established. Germany borrowed from the U.S., Germany paid the reparations demanded by Britain and France, and Britain and France used this money to pay their debts to the U.S. Although this looked like a stable cycle, the illusion collapsed with the 1929 Depression. This is precisely why World War I is not only military history, it is the most important turning point in financial history. With World War I, governments learned many things. They could abandon gold, they could inflate money, they could borrow at record levels, and they could persuade the public to accept all of this through perception games. And these teachings are still successfully used by governments today. Coming to the present, whenever central banks call inflation temporary, whenever governments raise the debt ceiling, whenever new money is printed, always remember 1914. Back then, too, everything is fine was said, and people believed it until the money in their pockets became worthless. Real wealth is not measured by the numbers you see on a screen or the shiny words of politicians. True wealth is being able to endure shocks, act with knowledge, and see through the illusions built right before our eyes. History does not replay the same scene, but it plays similar melodies. The financial script, written in 1914, has been staged again and again with new concepts and new excuses. And each time the outcome has been the same. Power centers protected themselves, and those who were unaware paid the price. The lesson from this story is clear. Printing money does not make it real, nor is the system solid just because those in charge say so. The truth is always hidden between the lines of the balance sheets, and history is the only guide that tells the truth without lying.